Welcome to the Cognitive Advantage Podcast, where you will gain insights and advice to help you leverage the full cognitive talent of your team, enhance employee engagement, and maximize your results and impact. Well, hello, Sira. How are you?
I'm doing well. Nice to see you.
You as well. I'm excited for this, and I am because you and I met a few months ago on LinkedIn and connected and had a number of discussions. We booked 30 minutes to talk and understand how our businesses overlap, intersect, and learn. And they turned into an hour discussion where I walk away wanting to talk more. So I'm excited today because this is an opportunity for me to share, I'll call it my growth mindset experience with those that have similar leadership experience to me, because I've learned so much from our discussions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always value these types of conversations. I think that it's essential to have them. There's so frequently the assumption that we're in different places and we're kind of top of the mountain talking at each other, when really when you then start to get into a conversation, you start to move down that mountain and realize we're actually connected at the
Mhm.
foundation, at the core, and there's so much more of like a universal application to what we're saying and how we're trying to solve problems, right? Maybe coming at it from different points of view, but we've got the same goals. So I've cherished our conversations.
Excellent. So let me just position it then for the audience and, the leaders that I know that are listening, which is leaders, what if I told you that your systems, your style, and your routines are causing you to underutilize your team's cognitive talent? And what if I also told you that with knowledge of how your teams process information, you can significantly increase your employee engagement, satisfaction, and retention?
Yeah, and those aren't just nice to have improvements, right? In our competitive marketplace today, that's the difference between flourishing and falling behind, right? So I think that we can show our audiences why this matters and what they can do about it.
We've talked a lot about words and some of the words maybe are misused and so forth. But when I think about the brain and how people process, you've mentioned to me a number of times there's no such thing as normal or average. So what does that mean, to how we lead teams?
Yes. So one concept that I really like debunking is that there is some kind of average, that there is a neurotypical way of working. And inside of workplaces, that terminology has no relevance at all. It does in a clinical setting, right? It's not to say that there aren't brain differences, but the reality is that no two brains are alike. And we've designed leadership systems for a non-existent average brain that doesn't exist. And the real challenge for us is actually acknowledging the diversity and depth of our cognitive experiences so that we can bring out the best in all of our team members.
You use an interesting term there that we're designing systems for the average brain. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So in the neurotypical design, there is this fictitious person who is extroverted and able to handle high stress, high stakes situations like all the time. They're able to respond immediately, right? They're quick processors. And the resilience, right? That's kind of a typical resilience makeup is that you can go into any situation and just lead,
Mhm.
behave effectively, right? Have the answers. I think of the term executive presence, right? There's kind of this stoic demeanor to this person, and the fluidity, right? Just being able to go in and out and solve problems again, like quickly. When that is one ignoring just the range of difference in human cognitive capacity, and not simply. I want to be really clear that it's not to say that someone outside of this neurotypical definition doesn't have the capacity to make quick decisions, doesn't have the capacity to solve problems in this way, or isn't even extroverted. It's just the assumption that this is the only way,
Mhm.
and having our system designed around this one way, which is actually the minority when you think about the ways that brains function, the innumerable differences that the human brain has, that we're not giving people an environmental context We're not giving people the environmental factors, the flexibility in environments that would allow all types of brains to bring their best thinking to bear on a situation, because we're expecting them to behave in a certain way all the time.
When you started talking about that person who shows up and, all the energy in the room, and it's kind of I think the leadership style that I was probably brought up in, and probably one that I've learned to emulate. But, from my experience with social styles and team dynamics, I've seen it play out repeatedly, though, where high performers, people who are really, really good, are viewed as maybe difficult or even slow because they're dealing with somebody who's flying into a room, they're looking to make decisions, they're trying to get things done. But when the reality is that they really provide strategic advantages that we sometimes don't recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we assume that it's just an I'm going to go into the numbers a little bit actually
All
on
right.
this, because I think it's important for people to understand like really what I'm talking about when I say that no two brains are alike. That when we think about the way leadership is designed and how we've designed workplaces to favor that extroverted, quick decision making, uh, kind of individualistic type of leader, we're leaving out the 30 to 50% of humans who are introverted, who do their best thinking in quiet environments.
Mhm.
We're leaving out the other 30%, and there may be a little bit of overlap here, but these are distinguished categories. The other 30% of the population who are highly sensitive processors. They have highly sensitive nervous systems, which allows them to take in more information consciously, which means they notice details and patterns that others miss, which means they need a little bit longer to process all that information that's coming into their brain consciously. We're leaving out the 1 in 5 people who have ADHD, autism, Tourette's, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and other cognitive differences. So that's just what we can easily measure. And if we add those up, right, like what are we talking about in terms of, right, the population of different, right? It's 95% plus, right, of people who have some form of cognitive variation. So that who exactly is that typical person, right, that we're designing leadership systems for?
Mhm.
It's so.
Sorry, that extroverted person that you talk about, as I mentioned earlier, is me. So if I
Yeah.
if I look at it and I think about maybe other leaders that are like me, people that I've interacted with over the years, they might look at this, and I'll use a term that, and I hate, that labeling, but like I'm neurotypical. So this doesn't apply to me. I mean, yeah, I mean, you've told me about other people, but how does this apply to me if I'm by definition a neurotypical leader?
Yes. So again, the thing to remember is that there isn't any such thing
Mhm.
really, that we have used this terminology inaccurately.
Mhm.
And what neuroscience tells us is that no two brains are alike. And while it can be for in data collection and reporting, we often right want to find a mean or a norm, right, a bell curve to make it simpler on ourselves when applying interventions. Right, when trying to make decisions, it's helpful. It'd be useful if we had more of the same, right? So we could have a one size fits all solution, but that just isn't true.
Mhm.
And I know, like you're saying, right? Some of us might be thinking, well, I feel pretty normal, or I feel pretty typical, so this doesn't apply to me. What's the big deal? And it's that is the point, right? It's not wrong to feel that way, right? You feel normal or typical because the systems were designed around
Right.
your particular processing style.
Mhm.
But what you are calling typical, just because systems were designed in that way, and that kind of normal is just one valid way among many. So the question isn't whether you're normal or not, right? It's whether the systems that we've designed, right, work for everyone on a team.
Right. So, one of the things that I came to appreciate in our early discussions is the clarity that you provided on certain terms. Again, this, as we just talked about the normal and neurotypical and clarifying some of that and maybe removing some of the stigma. But, you know, one of the terms you used when we talked, And something that I've seen you use in writing a number of times, which you've had, you've taken the time to clarify for me. I think it'd be important to clarify for the audience. And, you use a term like highly sensitive or a deep processor. And, I say that because some leaders may think, oh, highly sensitive, like they're being overly sensitive. But we're really not talking about like a special needs category. We're talking about a human or a natural variation, right? Like that's kind of what you mean.
Yes, exactly. So go a little bit technical here, but a highly sensitive person is kind of the colloquial term for this trait called sensory processing sensitivity.
Right.
And there are roughly three categories of folks, and we all have sensitivity, right, in our senses, right? It's the degree of intensity with which we experience the world that makes us highly sensitive. That's about 30%, or moderately sensitive. That's about 40%, or low sensitive, and that's the remaining 30%. It's an innate, biologically based trait, sensory processing sensitivity, involving deeper cognitive processing of physical, emotional, and social stimuli. And to be highly sensitive is not to be overly sensitive, right? Which is just a
Right.
judgmental term for being fragile.
Yeah.
But rather, these people are highly aware, right? So imagining your consciousness as a funnel, and your brain taking in a certain amount of information consciously, and then having a bottleneck, right, to process that information. Most of the sensory data that's coming in, right, to your brain nervous system is pushed to the subconscious. Totally relevant information that your brain is automatically doing that work for you, so that you can actually make decisions, use less energy, right, to make decisions, because you're not going like, well, there was that sound. Well, what do I do with that sound, right? So it's a lot of information, right? Most of it is sent to the subconscious. In a highly sensitive system, a highly sensitive person, they're taking in more information consciously. So the funnel gets bigger, right, as you progress along
Right.
this continuum of sensitivity, and they reflect deeply on experiences, which often leads to high creativity and intuition. Um, there's an emotional intensity that comes with being highly sensitive, so experiencing very high empathy, feeling both positive and negative emotions deeply. Roughly, again, like roughly 30% with the latest research on it, meta-analysis of studies over the last 30, 40 years, is that there's roughly 30% of the population who fall into this highly sensitive category. So a
Mhm.
minority, but not a small one.
And you're referring to that, is that the desire or the style to absorb more information and therefore more time to process.
Indeed. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. That
Okay.
if your funnel, right, is bigger, you're taking in more information consciously, but that bottleneck is no larger.
Right.
Everybody's cognitive bottleneck, right, is the same size. Then, yes, a highly sensitive person needs a bit more time to process all that incoming information.
Right.
But my gosh, like the ability to then find an opportunity, right, because of all of that data they've collected, or a threat, right, that somebody else might miss for not taking in as much information, not being as finely tuned to detail. That's incredibly advantageous for an organization.
Yeah, th this really reconciles with, the conversations we've had about, I focus on social styles, using the Merrill Reed social style model. And, I've seen analytical personalities, dismissed as overthinking and not been able to make a decision. But really, the other way to look at it is that because they're taking the time to process more information, possibly preventing costly mistakes, making sure that those that like myself, who may be really fast processors, but that by definition means I'm maybe not taking all of the relevant information into consideration. They're almost a counterbalance to my speed, for lack of a better term.
That's exactly right. And
Yeah,
that's what nature has in it, right? That's why there's the diversity that exists there, is that we need balance, right? It is not advantageous for us as a species. And that
yeah,
is right. Everything that we do is about survival as a species, whether it's literally the work that we're doing, or right, the wars that we enter, everything right about our existence is about survival. We are
yeah,
animals. And when there is an imbalance, right, it makes for an unhealthy system. It makes for a poor set of outcomes. It makes for higher risk in terms of our survival outcomes.
yeah. One of the things that we probably haven't talked about, but this is really getting my mind around it because I have so many situations in the past that I can think about. but is unconscious bias. And I think about it from the perspective of hiring. And I know that organizations over, say, the last 10 or 15 years have spent a lot of time making people aware of unconscious biases and so forth. But I think of myself as a leader hiring, and especially early in my career, hiring people that probably were a lot like me. And the risk that this provided to myself and the organization, because if I take a leadership team that I'm building and everybody thinks the same way, and I don't have analytics and I don't have expressives and amiables and drivers, I'm missing opportunities to fully, capitalize on the opportunities in the marketplace, for lack of a better term.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The assumption that, everyone should think quickly, make decisions with minimal processing time, or even work well in certain office types and demonstrate engagement in a certain way. We are absolutely overlooking at minimum 75% of skill sets that help us build relationships,
Mhm.
like notice fragmentation in culture, in team cohesion, that pick up on the subtleties in our environment, so they're picking up on opportunities and threat, that are actually able to process the complexity, the true complexity
Mhm.
of the human experience, including our workplaces and how we go about, right, creating healthy and happy systems that serve clients, right, and can scale and grow and be the best organizational system it can be.
So instead of asking, how do people fit our systems, we should really be asking what?
We should be asking, how do we design systems that unlock or leverage everyone's cognitive potential? Because none of this is about special needs, right? This, I really dislike accommodation language that we've created. And I know that it was created in order to protect,
Mhm.
but it's from a deficit perspective, that
Mhm.
we are accommodating different processing styles as if it's a burden to the business. No, by not leveraging, right, this cognitive capacity, right, these cognitive abilities, you are putting your business at risk,
Mhm.
right? So it's about optimal performance.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not as you say, putting at risk. I also think about it from the optimal side, as you mentioned, which is, missing opportunities. It's you're missing
Yeah.
ways to think. So if everybody's brain works differently, and I think about, systems and so forth, how does that change how we lead?
Yes, it certainly starts with language in my mind. And I talk about this a lot with clients who are coming from a deficit perspective. And that is it. I want to be clear that it's understandable. That is how we've treated difference as a society, as a people. And I'll talk from an Americentric perspective because that's where I'm located and that's where I've grown up and ascended. And role and responsibility here is that our legal frameworks for that, again, were designed to protect,
Mhm.
take in its language a deficit perspective, that if somebody requires a quieter environment, that they may have to request an accommodation for something that's a need for them to do their best work. And that's just as wild to me. It's just insane that we would call it an accommodation as opposed to like leaping at the opportunity when someone expresses a need to great put them in that environment so that they can flourish and grow and contribute, right, to the organization. All of
Mhm.
these requests are requests to contribute my best for you, to you, right? Leader, manager, CEO, organization, cause. So uh, it means shifting from accommodation thinking and accommodation language to optimization
Mhm.
strategy, that we're not helping different people because that puts an us them dynamic,
Mhm.
right, into the mix immediately. We're designing for cognitive diversity as the baseline reality.
So if I think about in practical terms, because you talk a little bit about it's not accommodative, but in some cases you are providing something different though, are you not? Like if, I think about a my son had a friend growing up who had a brain injury in a car accident later in life, needed to be put in a different room for writing his exams because he couldn't operate in the full, he was distracted. Okay. So is that not by definition then still an accommodation? Because that could still apply in the workforce as well, right?
It is different than what is being offered,
Okay.
right? So we are where we're starting from isn't a fair and equitable or inclusive place,
Okay.
right? We're starting from a very restricted, small, and exclusive position, which is that all people are like this, and we have a one size fits all solution,
Mhm.
and we expect everybody to conform, right? So it's your square peg, round hole, get in there. When that's just not the reality, and it was never the reality. Our organizations were designed around the metaphor of machinery. Well, that's never how human beings were or behave or in any relation at all to how a living system actually works. And organizations are rather living systems. They're nervous systems. They're not machines with parts that just get replaced. So we're starting from the wrong place and then thinking that what doing something differently is an accommodation, right? Or something outside of the norm, again, when this was never the norm.
So can you give me an example in real terms what an accommodation could look like? And again, maybe I'm using the
I,
wrong word with accommodation, but
yeah, yeah,
creating a customized environment or an adaptive environment or the right environment. I'm not quite sure of the language, but you know what I'm trying to say.
totally. Yes. And where I would like us to go ultimately, and this will take a while because
Mhm.
we have these legal frameworks that have language like reasonable accommodation,
Mhm.
which again, I'll articulate that the one that we're even suggesting that someone asking to have a need met at work is somehow an imposition to the business when the whole point of them meeting that need is so that they can contribute to the business.
Mhm.
Right? Like that's something the organization should want to do, not feel burdened to do. And then to boot, we add reasonable as if making that request, it's going to be something outlandish and crazy, right? Like, actually, I need to work in Hawaii. Like that's not the type of request people make.
Yeah, people do. Well, there will be somebody that takes it to the extreme, right?
That's there, and that's we do not need to design around that because
Yeah.
it's, and we know that from those who like game systems that the percentage is actually like less than 5%.
Mhm.
So we still can have frameworks, right? We can have policies, that protect organizations against that random and really unfortunate and the person who can actually cost the organization a lot of money for making insane requests. The grand majority, right, of your organization is literally just asking for the basic needs to be able to do their job well for you, right?
Yeah.
They're asking to participate in your system to the
Mhm.
best of their ability, and that's not an accommodation. I would like us to move away from that entirely and to have systems be designed in a flexible way. And we've seen some of that and we saw some of that through the pandemic, right? We had to embrace
Mhm.
flexible work. And we learned that actually people can work autonomously and they can work asynchronously and they can flex their schedule in a way that meets their needs. And some of those needs were family needs, right? As they were managing, their pets or their kids, et cetera, or their parents, those needs are also cognitive. And we
Mhm.
should have a
Mhm.
similar perspective and philosophy and belief system, which is a lot of really what culture is, right? It's a belief system and
Yeah.
creating an environment of psychological and neuropsychological safety that makes someone think, well, I do my best thinking in the morning. And so I actually am going to block off time there, and that's okay.
Mhm.
And sending signals, right, throughout the organization at all times, right? This never ends, that is okay. And we expect that, right? We expect you to tend to your needs. Here's the way that we offer flexibility in the system for you to do that. It looks like hybrid work. It looks like flexible work. It looks like asynchronous working hours. It looks like et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah. It gets me thinking that the problem or part of the problem today is that we are making these, and I'll use the word accommodations because it's consistent
mhm.
language, although not the language we like, but leadership is making these accommodations for you. but that's not what it should be positioned as. It's I'm making these accommodations for us because if I know that you're in a better place to learn and process in the environment at the time or whatever you need, there's also a benefit to me from a leadership and a team perspective.
Hmm.
And so I'm
Yes.
wondering if part of the gap is that I'm only looking at it as a leader, as an accommodation for you with no benefit to me because I don't fully understand why this is being requested and why it's a mutually beneficial decision. Is that a fair
Hmm.
assessment?
Yes. And there was a word you used earlier, I think adaptive. Right? Like what's a better word for accommodation? Is it
Yeah.
flexible? Is it adaptive? And we talk about adapting our communication style as leaders, right? We talk
Yeah.
about that's a need, right? That is it's as simple as that, right? Like we're already doing it in a lot of ways, and there's already this expectation, rightly so, for leaders to adapt to the people on their team in
Yeah.
order to get the best out of them. And so that's really what we're doing is an adaptive environment,
Good.
culturally, right? An adaptive environment in the relationship that we have with our team members. In the very, specific concrete example is that we need to adapt our communication style to the listeners' processing needs so that we know they hear our message, they understand its relevance, its urgency, the assignment, right? What their responsibility is, timelines, etc. Right? Like
Mhm.
that is an example of something we're already doing that we just need to continue to do, and that is to the advantage of the leader, to the advantage of those team goals, and to that
Mhm.
organization at large when we do that.
Yeah, you bring up something, and you and I believe, talked about this one time, but again, with the work I do on social styles, I think I shared a story where I had a leader who was by definition an analytic. I mean, I worked in an insurance organization for a number of years, so therefore I had a lot of actuaries, high processing, and I also had a leader who was a driver, typical sales leader, rah rah, that high energy and so forth. And I, as their employee, I needed to adapt the way that I communicated with them because I can't approach an analytic the same way with a driver. And if I did, I'm going to drive both of us crazy. I'm not going to get the success that I need from an outcome perspective. So, maybe can you talk a little bit about the role of the leader and the employee? Because this isn't all about the organization owing it to an employee or an employee asking for something. There's got to be some joint level of responsibility and accountability.
Definitely, yes. And I fervently believe that, and this, you could read this in the literature too on leadership and what's expected and what is the best way to get the best out of your team
Mhm.
is that you own 100% of that relationship, because direct reports are looking to you, right, for what is expected, what is allowed, what is safe, right, to do, to think, to how to behave. Um, and a leader, in my view, is 100% responsible for adapting their communication style to each of their listeners,
Mhm.
right? So that if you know that that person takes information excellently verbally, you deliver it that way. If it's written, right, or if it's visual, some combination thereof, or if it's alone for feedback, or it is in a group because they really like actually receiving that positive accolade in front of others, right? You're learning what that person needs to get the best out of them. And it is your responsibility as a leader to adapt your communication style to
Yeah.
the listener. Create, I think part of that is then creating conditions for vulnerability, right? And authentic contribution, that when people feel and it's a neurological, right, at a neurological level first, the feeling of psychological safety, right? Your nervous system feels it first, long before your brain ever recognizes consciously, am I, is
Okay.
it safe or unsafe? So that's neurological safety is a concept I talk a lot about, and what signals leaders can send, and that's verbally, of course, but it's also walking the talk, right? You behaving and then being able to see that. So creating conditions for vulnerability by being vulnerable, by talking about your own needs, right? And articulating, actually, I really can't have a one-on-one in the morning. Like I've got to be
Yeah.
after 10 o'clock because my brain doesn't really turn on and I want to be able to give you my full presence. And that happens typically between 10 and 3, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, truly understanding that cognitive diversity is the baseline and thus understanding that that cognitive diversity is a strategic advantage. That is also a leader's responsibility and recognizing that you need only look to your external environment and the diversity in any species on our planet to understand that diversity is necessary. And
Yeah.
so the same holds true for cognitive diversity. It's actually what makes you stronger, right, rather than weaker.
Vulnerability is a leadership superpower. And what I mean by that is that by demonstrating it, you're also giving people on your team the permission to be vulnerable as well. And so you're creating that right environment that everybody can thrive because it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to share your challenges. It's okay to share what you need. And therefore, if the leader can demonstrate that, it creates that right environment and optimizes the system. Now, you've talked a little bit about, optimizing the system and so forth, but what are some of the key concepts that leaders need to understand about optimizing the system or an optimization approach?
I mean, first and foremost is this mindset. I think the overarching kind of theme of this conversation is that your mindset matters first and foremost. If you are treating cognitive differences as disadvantages, we're already off to a losing start. So we really do need to let go of some of these outdated, antiquated, and scientifically incorrect mindsets and viewpoints
Mhm.
around cognitive diversity. And that alone creates an openness, a growth mindset, which is really rooted in curiosity.
Mhm.
And that is absolutely part of the strategy is that if you can remain curious, then you are much more apt to build relationships versus breaking them and uprooting trust because you'll ask questions,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? What do you need? How can I help? What does that mean? Can you help me understand? Right? And getting people to be comfortable because you are engaging that conversation and offering that space to have a conversation around cognitive needs, that you're
Mhm.
creating an environment then where it's safe to do so.
Mhm.
And then that also helps create more self-aware employees
Mhm.
who are engaging in their own self-reflection and what are my needs? When do I do my best work? How do I do my best work? Is it with others or not? Is it in the morning or at night? Is it when I'm at home or at work? Et cetera, et cetera. And once
Mhm.
people start talking about that and being able to articulate it, then you're getting going to get into the space of stress response and being able to identify your environmental triggers and when, right, you're actually getting out of your optimal performance zone and into stress where you aren't going to have as many great ideas and aren't going to solve as many problems and be able to signal that. So there's just this beautiful compounding effect, right, of heightened awareness that you can all build together,
Mhm.
which makes for again a flow of information, right? Just this feedback loop effect of critical conversations happening as needed when needed,
Mhm.
and thus people again like feeling that safety to signal, oh, I saw something, I noticed something, maybe we should do it this way, or like maybe we shouldn't, right? And then you're leveraging all of those cognitive skill sets towards more creativity, new ideas, better ideas, innovative thinking, better problem solving.
So how do we create this environment? Because, we're talking about a lot of important things, but it also requires some change. People to think differently, people to, as you say, approach things differently, ask different questions. But how do we create that environment?
Yeah. One really outside of mindset, right, in communication, where possible, creating any flexibility in the framework, as they call it. Right? This organizational system is a framework, right? It's got rules, it's got guardrails, and that's a formal culture. But it also has, the way things really work around here.
Mhm.
And again, that's the signals, right? That's the signals that you're sending in, and symbols that they're experiencing, different artifacts that exist around them, right? That again, that people are picking up on as they're showing up to a system. So, what language are you using,
Mm.
right, to describe the needs on your team? Is it deficit or negative, right, language?
Accommodation.
Accommodation, as a
Yeah,
for instance, right?
yeah,
Like we have to accommodate Tom because
yeah,
blah 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 blah. Like
yeah.
it's as opposed to Tom does his best thinking when he isn't interrupted, so we're going to give him some time.
It's
Okay, totally different than we have to do this, right? It's oh no, we get to do this, and it's good that we know this so that we can act on it.
yeah. Yeah, it gets me thinking of that old Albert Morabian study, which talked about the fact that 7% of what we say is in the words, and 38% is in the tone and inflection, and 55% is in the body language. And the way that
Mhm.
you said that can be interpreted two different ways. Oh, well, we gotta, give Sira some time to do this, or we gotta give her some time to do this because that's the way she processes best, or whatever, however we want to phrase it. But it's not only
Yes.
the words, it's how we say it. And also, we say it in such a supporting way. I'm thinking also too, when I think about things that organizations or leaders can do, you talk in detail there about a meeting as one example, but I'm thinking even broader than that. Like I think you mentioned one time,
Mhm.
even meeting lighting and other types of things that you can do to recognize or at least provide choice. What are some of
Mhm.
those?
Certainly. Just thinking about open office noise levels. There was this big shift from cubicles, thinking that that was really restricting collaboration, definitely. But there was an overcorrection to let's just have everything be open and have it be a cafeteria, which makes for an insane amount of noise. So where the compromise then, or the happy middle, is to have different spaces,
Mhm.
right? Where okay, there are quiet spaces and there are collaborative, louder open spaces, and where possible, right? We're not talking about, all right, blowing your budget on just office design, right? We understand that you're operating again within a framework, but find the freedom within the framework. Do everything you can to make it as inclusive as possible. So even if it's just a little corner where it's designated for, this is headphone space, right? And as you're walking past that space, you're quiet, right? You're not, past the headphone space.
Kind of that
Just
library thing, right?
yeah, yep, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you mentioned, meeting lighting. Okay, the cheapest lighting in the world, obviously, is that horrible fluorescent lighting. Okay, swap it out, right? Invest a little bit of money in that for the long haul
Yeah.
advantage of people not being distracted by overhead buzzing lighting. Again, when you think about the long term impact of someone's cognitive capacity, at the ROI, right, of having the full brain
Mhm.
available while it's at work, right, doing its work things, that is going to positively impact your bottom line. Or meeting fatigue, right? If we're on virtual meetings, there are some meetings where, yes, you need to be camera on. It's a critical conversation. There are other meetings where you can make it clear that people are allowed to turn their camera off,
Mm.
right? So those
If
are
it's
just
one
some
way,
like,
especially. Yeah.
yes, yeah. And those are just a few,
Yeah.
small environmental changes that dramatically impact, right, the brain's ability to process, right, and
Mhm.
and to stay at its like full capacity. Because obviously, a brain gets tired, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to make sure that it has the rest recovery period it needs to actually deliver on the task at hand.
Yeah. I'd like to maybe give you a real world question here. What I mean by that is that we've talked now in general about companies and leadership and so forth, but let me share a story. So I have a friend whose son is autistic and works in cybersecurity. Now, he's brilliant at his technical work, but he struggles with what people call, and you mentioned it earlier, executive presence. You know, and the traditional advice is, well, be more charismatic, speak up more, network better. But are we giving him the wrong advice, or how do we deal with this differently?
Yes, yeah, this is it's a great example because it shows the kind of chicken egg issue, which is at the heart of systemic change, is that this individual needs the confidence to communicate cognitive strengths, but he's talking with leaders who are following traditional paradigms and expectations that don't recognize those strengths as valuable.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we need both individual empowerment and system change. I'm I fervently believe in us taking responsibility for our self-development, building self-awareness and self-reflection, and practicing right, like how to communicate our value. And I had a small comment earlier, right, about like just the different ways of thinking about needs. And someone could say it's a reasonable accommodation, and that makes it seem like a burden, or it's to leverage this person's critical thinking skills. They need alone time. We're going to give it to them. Just like, the power of this statement and the,
Mhm.
fracturing of this one is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So having this individual in practice communicating value and have those kind of scripts is absolutely something that an individual can control. And so I believe in, controlling what you can control. But on the other side, right, those leaders absolutely um, need to understand what the strengths are of different processing styles, and that it's going to take some time for someone who's an incredibly deep thinker to, and that person, right, is able to do the deep analysis and the kind of critical and complex and complicated cybersecurity work that they require. And we might want to meet that person's needs, right? Then
I
for them
guess
to
I'm
be
just
able to
thinking
do
about
that.
it from the perspective that it sounds like the advice is, okay, get really good at practicing and sharing your value, your impact, the way you think, and so forth. But then there's
Mhm.
also, that issue of, well, then I got to hope that that's going to work with the person who's interviewing me, for example. Let's say I'm going for a more senior
Mhm.
level role, when really they
Mhm.
should be looking and saying, well, what types of, cognitive strengths do I need in this role? And recognizing that it's going to be communicated differently than somebody who is an extroverted salesperson who's going to come in and share their stories differently, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I'm just trying to reconcile that because that's really the challenge we're dealing with today. Organizations aren't going to change overnight. We can have great
Mhm.
discussions and experts like yourself talking to this, but how do we kind of bring it all together? Because that chicken and egg you say, which is I know what they need to do and I know what I need to do, but they're not ready for me and I'm not ready for them. And it's kind of how do we get there, I guess is
Mhm.
is is what I'm curious.
I know. And it's
Yeah.
the answer isn't easy, right? We just start. We just start. And I think that chicken egg, scenario breaks when we address both sides simultaneously, which is what I do in my work, right? It's that, culture change, organizational change is individual change.
Mhm.
Right? Like it's not one or the other. We are doing both. And
Mhm.
so we are designing formal systems and learning experiences and policies and using language and symbols and terminology, et cetera, that is empowering and inclusive and more scientifically accurate and et cetera. And right, we're also then at the individual level going, well, it is actually everyone's responsibility to understand their own needs and to meet those needs,
Mhm.
right, as best as possible on your own. But then also find really simple language for communicating those needs with others so that you can get those needs met at work, right?
Mhm.
In the event that you can't meet them on your own, right? You need some kind of environmental condition change, right, in order to meet those needs. So I still think that that's everyone's personal responsibility, and so it's both. The answer is
Yeah.
both.
Yeah, so I mean, it's about people adapting their communication style, as you mentioned earlier, to their audience, whether it's a leader somebody on their team, or in my case, I shared how I did that with my leader. Can you share an example from your experience where you adapted your communication style for a different processing style?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I worked at a civil and environmental engineering firm, and we had a team that also was West Coast, East Coast, right? So fast West, East Coast, right? Type of like very direct and to the point, and also skewed action oriented, right? Make decisions quick, learn from those decisions, get V1 out the door, and then, we'll get feedback and then we'll do V2
I get that.
versus, yep, versus our not just West Coast, but our water wastewater team, environmental engineers who tended to skew on the opposite side of things, that more blue analytical thinking. Let's gather a little bit more data first, and let's make sure that we go in with the best idea, insight, right, way forward possible based on all of the information, right, we've collected. So that analytical processor and our quick decision makers are getting frustrated with our analytical processors. But instead of pushing the deeper processes to decide faster, we and it's with meeting effectiveness, right? Like we're all meeting. So like, how are we showing up to these meetings and what's expected? It's like, let's start sending just meeting materials earlier,
Mhm.
right? So they have more time to process, so they know that we're showing up to this meeting to do a little brainstorming. Yes, there's going to be room for possibilities, but we also need to make a decision. And so let's prepare all brains, who are coming to this meeting for the task at hand by making that task at hand very clear and providing materials ahead of time for those right deep processors to actually process and to be able to show up to that meeting with already right in process, right, like a few of the ideas, right, so that they could come prepared with insights that prevented some costly mistakes in the first few months of a project, right? Again, as opposed to being like forced to think, process, and decide in this tiny little window, right? Like we stop trying to speed up, right, processing and just
Mhm.
start leveraging it strategically, because they're not slow. They have a depth of processing that requires more time to actually analyze, right? Which means great risk management. That's pattern recognition that saves the company from costly mistakes and reversals down the road. So that wasn't about accommodating differences. That was about optimizing, different types of performance.
Yeah, you said something there that I just have to repeat. They're not slow, it's just deeper processing. And
Yeah.
again, I smile a lot when you're telling these stories because I'm going, yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I'm that East Coast guy that you're talking about. So
Mhm.
what would you say are some of the cognitive advantages that the different styles bring that leaders miss? I can think of a number that I know I've missed over the years, and or should I say, I came to appreciate, and I got to about a level like this, and now I'm probably here because I've had the opportunity to talk to you. But what are some of those different
Mm.
styles that they've missed?
Yes. So deep processors, what that means is you're taking in more information consciously, right? So it's a lot more data, a lot more detail that a person has to analyze. And what happens when you have a lot more information, right, at your disposal is that you could catch risk. You can also see opportunity. You can see long-term patterns in that someone else who isn't picking up on all of that information or as much information wouldn't see. So that highly sensitive person, again, the person who's picking up on more information consciously, they are also reading team dynamics
Mhm.
and customer needs early. So it's not just quantitative
Mhm.
information, it's qualitative data that they're also gathering. And so again, that the fracture or the beginning of a fracture in morale or cohesion, engagement, right, loyalty, trust, like these are things that deep processors pick up on early
Mhm.
and in time to intervene, right, in time to remedy. So
Mhm.
preventing errors and optimizing workflows, yes, but also protecting retention, right, and
Yeah.
ensuring that people stay engaged and performing at their highest potential. Um, yeah, they're going to see the solutions that others miss, but only if we design systems that allow their strengths to emerge. And again, that's partly the symbols, the terminology, the language, right? The behavior that they're seeing around them, right? At the peer level, but absolutely at their managerial level, and then the system level, right? The signals that they're getting there that says like, okay, the way I am is actually valued here. Okay, so
Mhm.
I'm going to bring all of my capabilities to bear because it is safe to do so. That is what the brain is always looking for, is safety to proceed. Um, and yeah, it's just about optimizing, yeah, the
Yeah.
conditions for again for all people to bring out their best.
Yeah, you talk about something. I refer to it from a strategic mindset perspective as the ability to connect the dots. And
Yeah.
what I heard from you is that deep thinker probably is looking at more dots and looking for connections between them versus somebody, maybe like myself, who may race through something and not, I may discount it. Whereas there may be a risk that they're going to find a way to understand and mitigate. And I say this because I know I saw that many times in insurance, because again, I dealt with a lot of deep thinkers and a lot of analytics who I came to appreciate the value they brought and knew that they needed more time to process because that was just the way they worked. Provide the information in advance, give them an opportunity, ask some questions in advance, and then use the meeting as a bit of a debrief to walk through it and discuss next steps, as opposed to, okay, do you have an answer for me? Are we ready to move forward? And creating that
Yes.
uncomfortable environment where they're now their central nervous system is firing on them, and no one's going to benefit from that conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
we've talked a little bit about it's not really about managing difficult people, although I know some leaders may think that somebody who is highly sensitive or taking extra time is being difficult or needs some form of accommodation, that's the way they're going to view it. But how do we shift the leader's mindset? How do we get them seeing the value and the benefit of, finding ways to maximize the benefit to everybody?
I keep coming back to this, and it sounds simple, but we know that mindset is the hardest thing to
Mhm.
change. Is that we have we have been taught, it's been reinforced, all our systems are designed around a particular processing style that is
Mhm.
in actuality a very, very tiny minority. But we are just at the beginning, right, of really broadcasting that, making that mainstream, and coming to terms with that as a species, as leaders who are falling into that dominant that dominant and traditional way of working, or are having to come to terms with the fact that that is actually not the dominant cognitive style.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that that is not useful or valid. It absolutely is. In an emergency situation, I certainly don't want to spend all day figuring out all the ways that we could escape the building. I want
Yeah.
somebody to make a decision.
Just get me out. Yeah.
Just get me out of here.
Yeah.
So there are absolutely times where we need to make a decision fast, and we're not going to collect as much information as maybe someone would want, and that is the right thing to do,
Yeah.
right? There's value in all of this, right, and in all of these styles, and it's the mindset around that cognitive diversity is the baseline, right? That is a fact, and that no two brains are alike. That is
Mhm.
a fact, right? These are simple statements, but with massive ramifications for somebody who's been thinking, this in this traditional dominant, right, like way of leadership. It's kind of industrial revolution style of mechanized style of leadership.
Yeah.
Um, so it once you change your mind, right? Everything changes. It's You then have an entire new lens for your approach to relationships of any kind, when you change your mind in this way. So it's yeah, with it's not viewing things as difficult, right? But acknowledging that everyone has the potential for high performance with an environment that matches their needs. So if you can adapt the environment, you can unlock insane amounts of human potential. Right? You're maximizing human potential to maximize right? The outcome of your business objectives. Isn't that what we're all trying to do as leaders? Right?
So,
And
so
so
let's
when you,
help out the leaders here then. What are
Mhm,
three signals that leaders should start noticing about, well, the cognitive diversity on their team?
sure. So first, you can look at who's talking and who's not, right? Who is speaking first or raising a hand first versus who is not. That person probably isn't sitting there not thinking. They're probably thinking a lot, right? And maybe thinking the deepest. That somebody who actually needs processing time might have the most strategic insights, and following up with that person in a different way, right, in a different setting, you'll be able to get right those insights from that individual if again you adapt right to that individual's needs. And then who actually disengages verbally, but delivers high quality output later, right? Then that's a signal that they need a different contribution channel. Because
Okay.
again, the stimulation that one is taking in a meeting, say, can be overwhelming, can lead to overstimulation, and that there's still lots going on, right? But it's processing that isn't then making it out into a verbalized statement or verbalized contribution. But there's so much going on in here, that's good stuff. And then maybe third, right? Like who can you tell is struggling in a certain environment but excelling in others? That tells you a lot about how to optimize conditions. It's not
Right.
about fixing people, right? It's just about finding environments where people can flourish.
So some of this is visual, as you pointed out, but are there some questions that leaders could ask that could help identify or clarify?
Yes. How do you do your best thinking? Where do you do your best thinking? Do you like to work with others or do you prefer alone time? What conditions help you contribute the your best thinking? None of those are accommodation questions, right? They're how do I optimize,
Mhm.
right, your performance
Right.
questions.
So, I'm kind of one of those leaders that like to experiment with stuff. And so I'm thinking about, challenging the leaders on the call. What's one experiment that they could try this week? Something that they could change that would be beneficial or at least test to see if it's beneficial.
One of the areas of organizational systems that I go after systematically are meetings and just sending an agenda at all,
Mhm.
but sending it,
Yeah.
24 hours in advance,
Yeah.
right? Just trying a written option for input, right? Before a verbal discussion. That is one environmental and communication variable that you can
Yeah.
change,
Yeah.
that's easy and free. Mm,
Yeah. I just as an aside, I didn't go to meetings if there was an agenda. That's it's
yeah.
kind of the other way. It kind of forces the team
Hmm.
to recognize the importance of having one.
Exactly.
Sierra, today we focused on really busting myths around, we use terms like normal and typical and understanding cognitive diversity. And I know I have a much better understanding from our discussions, and hopefully the people that are listening have the same. But they see it now as a competitive advantage, hopefully, and we've shared some practical examples. Once leaders understand this foundation, where do you see kind of the biggest opportunity for immediate impact?
Hmm. I'm going to go back to meetings. That it's where we meeting effectively is how we connect,
When we have enough of them.
right? And we have so much, so many meetings, so many meetings. But it's root, right? Meetings are about connection. It's
Yeah,
how we connect with somebody else. You
yeah,
you must meet. You must gather, right?
yeah.
In order to connect with somebody else, whether that's virtually or in person or whatever it is, on the phone, etc. And meetings are how we build trust. Then, right? Because if it's where we connect, then it's in that connection and what happens there that we then start to form those trust bonds.
Mhm, mhm.
And trust is the foundation of loyalty.
Yeah.
So
I love how you're
I've
linking this to a purpose and trust and, connection and culture by definition. So session two, the next time we have one of these, we'll focus on meeting design for cognitive diversity. How does that sound?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So for our viewers, we both encourage you to start, well, noticing the cognitive diversity on your teams. Both Sira and I have, we offer assessment tools to understand both processing styles and leadership approaches. And the goal is ultimately to make you more confident and impactful and create an environment that everybody can thrive, both the leader and all of their teams.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, awesome. And thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited for this next conversation.
Thank you very much, Sira. It was great.